has Ukraine finally broken through the second line of Russia's defenses? And is Russia getting desperate, trying to find anyone who's willing to fight in this conflict? I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. It's September 5th, 2023. This is your daily Ukraine update. Let's get right into it. Okay, first, taking a look at the combat map. The biggest change, as you guys can see right here, Ukrainian control being changed from, of course, controlling small portions of the first line of defense, the so-called tank ditches, to pushing Russian forces back and controlling just a small portion right here of this second line of Russian trench works. And as you guys know, this is significant because if you can control inside these trenches, you take a trench's of effectiveness as an obstacle and as an emplacement, and you bring it back to even ground. We've seen enough trench clearing videos to know that once Ukrainian forces get into some of these trenches, it becomes a much more even fight. It's much easier for them to clear it out. The hard part is getting to the trenches, which they have done effectively. Obviously, it's taken a long time, a lot of systematically clearing minefields, but they have done so. And now that we're seeing that, I think we're going to start to see them really start to roll Russian forces, at least in some of these secondary lines. I think Russian forces, especially at Novoprokopivka, are going to be put in a lot of pressure. You can see here the 70th Motorized, 210th, a BARS squad, which is a reserve element, and a number of motorized rifle regiments. They're going to be in a lot of trouble. It's not clear, again, that even some of these VDV units were able to actually stabilize the situation. And as you guys can see, there's a lot of this territory that's manned by BARS, which is reserve units. But again, from what we've heard, a lot of these units, good or bad, are increasingly even in terms of fighting experience. Conscripts are just sent where they're needed on the front lines. I don't think there's a lot of distinction happening between very elite units like the VDV and reserve units like BARS. The only other major change to the front line that's worth discussing is outside of Andriivka in the Marinka area. Actually, I think that's a little north of here. In the Marinka area, which is, there we go, it's just south of Andriivka, you can see Russian forces making a small advance, pushing Ukrainian forces back 2 blocks in Marinka, but not a really significant change relative to the significantly meaningful incursion by Ukrainian forces holding this second line of defense. Anyway, guys, there's not really been any updates in the combat map. And if you're interested in seeing some of the videos from this heavy fighting, I do the analysis of those videos on combatvetnews.com. One is dropping today. We're going to look at the fighting from this Verbova for this contested region. We're going to be checking that out on Combat Vet News today. So you definitely want to become a member. Any one of these tiers gets you access to the members only content. You know that YouTube and Patreon have demonetized any video basically showing any level of war content. They'll demonetize this one if I even show you the thumbnails. So become a member of Combat Vet News and you'll be able to view my twice weekly combat video update and analysis. Plus, it's the best way to support the channel. Anyway, taking a look at the War Mapper, right? There's just his monthly updates on the status of total gains. And you can see when people talk about the war getting to a stalemate, you can see on a month-by-month basis how stable this war has increasingly gotten. Both sides have gotten a lot better at being on the defensive. And you can see that while Ukrainian forces, right, here's the Kharkiv offensive, here is the series of liberation campaigns in Kherson when Russia withdrew. But you can see since then, neither side has liberated more than even 0.1% of their territory, right? Remember, this 0.05 represents the Russian surge in Bakhmut and Soledar. Then there's been total neutrality. And then this 0.4% represents the kickoff of Ukraine's counteroffensive. So it's important to keep these things in perspective. There is a belief, I think, that that it's possible that this is staging for some sort of breakthrough. We can see here that momentum remained stagnant until it didn't. And I think there's a belief by a lot of commanders, and there's a good credible argument that this is leading to a larger and deeper breakthrough if Russian lines can be broken, so to speak. Moving on, what I thought was interesting is that Cuba, of all countries, has recently said it uncovered a human trafficking ring that had been recruiting Cubans to try to fight in the Russian Civil War. Or, excuse me, Civil War. Nope, not yet. Not with Prigozhin gone. The Russia-Ukraine War. This human trafficking ring appeared to claim to be employing Cuban citizens to do construction and other kind of labor type work in occupied areas of Ukraine. But once they arrived, they found themselves being forced to fight. What's interesting about this is that Cuba and Russia do have pretty tight ties, relatively speaking, right? They've hosted each other's ministers of defense. But on Friday, right, a Miami-based TV station and newspaper published testimonies from two teenagers who said they were tricked into working alongside the Russian army on construction sites in Ukraine. The teens called for help getting out as quickly as possible. Though some other Cubans said they do sign up for Moscow's armed forces, hoping to get legalized status in Russia. Of course, one of the reasons that the Cubans particularly are desirable to the Russian military is that Cuba has a mandatory conscription policy for males. So young Cuban men universally have military training, right? So they're already proficient with firearms, first aid, and other basic soldiering skills, meaning that they can leapfrog ahead. When they sign up, they are already basically ready to fight, at least by Russian standards. And so doing so, every Cuban represents someone who can go straight to the front lines, especially given Cuban military has a lot of Soviet-era equipment, uses a lot of Soviet doctrine, so they're even more closely aligned to the Russian way of war. What's interesting, too, is that according to the UK's Ministry of Defense, in their defense intelligence update from 2 days ago, Cuba is not alone. Russia has been appealing to citizens of places like Armenia and Kazakhstan, offering what is for there a significant sum of money, almost $5,000 in initial payments and $2,000 a month in salaries, to fight in Ukraine. Of course, there's also Russia is also trying to get Central Asian migrants who come to Russia for civilian work, labor, and construction, promising them fast-track citizenship and salaries up to $4,000 USD. Uzbek migrant builders in Mariupol have reportedly had their passports confiscated upon arrival and been coerced to join the Russian military. There are at least 6 million migrants from Central Asia in Russia, which the Kremlin sees as potential recruits. This is because Russia, of course, realizes that a large mobilization would be wildly unpopular and might even show up in an embarrassing lack of confidence in their 2024 presidential elections. Of course, forcing foreign nationals to do your fighting for you is a time-honored tradition going back at least to Rome. So it's a way to have all the benefits of launching a war with none of the drawbacks from your citizenry. Though I will say, by the time Rome was conscripting foreign fighters, foreign militaries in large numbers, like we're talking about here, it was a sign that the Roman Empire had not quite fallen, but had long since passed its heydays, right? Generally empires grow because their own citizens are willing to fight for them. Anyway, guys, that is all I had. Of course, a huge thank you to all the members of combatvetnews.com, but especially our Colonel tier members. Let's get these guys up there. Thanks to our Colonel tier members, and thanks to our Lieutenant tier members, and thanks to all of our members of combatvetnews.com. I couldn't do this without you guys. Thank you so much, and I'll see you all in the next one. Cheers.